Hello, and welcome to this webinar brought to us by the National Foreign Language Center out of the University of Maryland, part of the Apart But Together Expanding Our Community series. My name is Mike Travers. I'm a Spanish teacher at Wellesley High School, and today I'm here to talk to you about the topic that everybody wants to talk about, but at the same time, no one wants to talk about. Today we're going to be talking about grammar. We're going to try to figure out where does grammar fit in terms of a proficiency-based classroom. And I'm here representing NAFLA, and I'm also here representing NECTFL. And I want to thank NECTFL for the opportunity to present this to you. I was able to present at their conference in February of 2020, and I look forward to being able to talk to you a little bit more about this. So let's take a look and kind of do like an intro to things. So the first thing we got to get over is the fact that I'm going to use the word grammar. I feel like sometimes we get into this sort of place in these awesome conferences and we hear all these great ideas, and the word grammar gets thrown out and people are like, oh no, you can't say that word. That word's not allowed, right? So I feel like I want to get you very comfortable to me saying the word grammar because that is part of language instruction. And so here you see two opposing views to grammar. You see some people that are strict grammarians, those people that love to serve and correct, as it says there. Those people that think that grammar should be the backbone of everything that we do. And we've seen that position for so long. But then you have somebody on the opposite side that says, I hate grammar, we don't do grammar, you don't need grammar whatsoever. And so you have these two opposing views as they look at grammar. And it's causing a lot of confusion for teachers, and then that in turn causes a lot of confusion for students. So what I'm really kind of going to propose in today's session is talking about this balance, the balance between people that say we need grammar, people that say that we don't need grammar, and finding that middle ground between the two of them, right? So we have some can-do statements, and this is what we're going to be covering for today. So the first part of the presentation is I can explain what it means to teach grammar as a concept and in context. Prior to telling you anything more about this, I want to tell you that you're not going to have all of your answers sort of solved through this presentation. I think this is one of those things that you're just going to keep continuously working at and continuing to find new ways to use it and do it in your classroom. And I'm not the be-all end-all of this topic per se. I'm somebody that's done some research on this. I've done a lot of stuff in my classes with it, and I want to talk to you about what's worked and how things can be interpreted. And then our second can-do statement is I can describe the steps to making a PACE lesson. So we're going to look specifically at how you can teach grammar as a concept using a model that I've used quite a lot in my classes and have had a lot of success with. So ACTFL came out with these core practices. And these are the 6 core practices that me personally, this is how I define proficiency-based teaching, along with all of the thousands of other things that we do in our classes, right? So through these core practices, we see things like target language use, that 90%. We see the authentic resources. We see interpersonal, right? We see planning with backwards design. We see appropriate oral feedback. And then we have this one, teaching grammar as a concept and using in context. And if you look at the bottom, it says teach grammar as a concept. Students focus on the meaning before they focus on the form. So when you talk to teachers, I feel like they have a really good sense of how to do 5 out of the 6 of these things. They feel pretty confident. And then they get to that 6th one, they're like, oh boy, this one I can't really figure out. This one doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I want to talk you through this a little bit so that you have an idea of what I'm actually talking about. So at the bottom of the screen here, you see ACTFL came out with their guiding principles, and they have this really awesome document that I don't think has been circulated that much through at least my personal learning connections. And I feel like it's a really good document that is going to relieve a lot of people. Some people go into this thinking that they have to like absolutely uproot everything that they've ever thought about language teaching. And it's just kind of shifting the way you do it. Leslie Grant always phrases it as, we're not asking you to have a divorce from grammar, we're asking for you to have a new relationship with it. So when you read this document that explains grammar as a concept and in context, the first thing that they tell you is that grammar should be chosen in the context of a theme to promote communication. So often before this, I remember I was teaching and I just knew that the next topic was the imperfect with no regard whatsoever for why they needed the imperfect. That wasn't something that ever really crossed my mind. It was, okay, that's the next thing in the textbook, so I'm going to teach it that way. There has to be some sort of goal with this, all right? So how am I going to promote communication? What's my goal with that? Learners need to know why they need to know this. And they need to know this is going to be able to help you to do something. So for example, I think of things like the subjunctive. Back when I used to teach the subjunctive, kids were like, I don't know why this is important. This doesn't matter to me. But in reality, it's a way of expressing an opinion. And let's be real, kids have opinions. They want to talk about their opinions. So if you kind of get them into the hook of like, yeah, you're going to want to do this. This is really important so that you can talk about how you feel about the environment, so that you can talk about how you feel about this piece of artwork, so that you can talk about how you feel about school, right? Get them invested in that. The focus is going to be on the meaning of the words and not on the forms. So essentially, you're looking at grammar now, not in the sense of learning it as a tense, but you're learning it as a word. You're kind of learning it as a vocabulary. So instead of, I think of in Spanish, people go into great depths talking about verbs like gustar and how this is an indirect object and how the last part matches the thing that comes afterwards, whether it's gusta singular, gusta in plural. Teaching this vocabulary, right? Focusing on the meaning of that word, that they know what it means to say me gusta, right? And the last part, which blows a lot of people's minds, is that learners should have experiences learning grammar explicitly and implicitly. So the document talks about some research, because the research out there is very, very, very conflicted. So some people will say it has to be explicit, some people have to say it's implicit. And so what Actwell argues is that there should be examples of both. Explicit can be as simple as saying this is how a sentence is formed. Implicit can be them interpreting an authentic resource and then discovering the usage of different tenses. Okay? So teaching grammar as a concept involves those four real things. But at the same time, there's a couple things that it does not mean that's really, really important to kind of keep in mind as well. So the first thing, a lot of people read this and a lot of people start proficiency-based teaching and they're like, all right, no grammar, nope, I'm gonna stop it. We don't teach any grammar whatsoever. And that's not true. We still need that grammar there. Teaching a language without grammar doesn't make it a language in that sense, right? It's just what we're doing is we're redefining what it means to teach grammar. We're not only doing grammar. Now we're doing communication. And the grammar is going to be what I use to support that communication. Some people then say, okay, well then our courses should be grammar intensive. And that's also not what it's saying it should mean at that point, right? Our grammar needs to be chosen deliberately for communicative purposes. So there has to be a reason behind doing it. And you don't want a mismatched meaning, right? You don't want there to be no actual way for you to do this, or for some convoluted way to do this. So I think of an example back when I was teaching using kind of a hybrid model where I was transitioning to proficiency-based teaching, not always following what I needed to do. And so I knew that I needed to change this unit, and I knew that the imperfect was the next grammar, and the vocabulary that ended up getting chosen was careers and professions. So a unit that could have been what do you want to be when you grow up became what did you used to want to be when you were younger? And that just so convoluted. There's no communicative purpose behind that. Okay? And then the last part that I want to be clear about is that whether grammar should be taught explicitly or implicitly, what Actwell is saying is that no, they should have opportunities to do both. There should be explicit in there and there should be implicit in there. Now, what's hard is that we're really good at the explicit stuff. We know how to do that. That's what we've been doing for years. But implicit grammar, that's the hard stuff. That's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky. And so what I'm going to talk about today is talking about the PACE model, which is a way to kind of bridge that gap. And I found it a really, really good way to do that, so that you're doing explicit and implicit in what I call a discovery grammar model. Okay? So speaking of that, we're going to transition over to talking about what is this PACE model, right? So you may have heard of it, maybe you read about it, maybe it's one of those things that you've heard at PDs and you've heard people talk about it and you've always wanted to try it but have never fully grasped it, or if you've Googled it, the examples that are out there are not always great. There's some that involve songs but don't really get at what you want to be doing in that sense. So what I want to do is I want to talk you through the PACE model, what it is, and then I want to show you a really successful example that I've had in my classes that I'm still modifying to this day. So PACE is an acronym because God forbid we don't have another acronym in world language teaching because we have so many of them. So PACE stands for presentation, attention, co-construction, and extension. And so this kind of guides me through step-by-step what I'm going to do as I present a new grammar point to my students in a communicative way, in a way that promotes communication, right? So each one of these steps are super important, and I'm going to argue that they're all equally as important. Some people will say that, oh, the presentation is where you have to do most of the work. I think every step holds an equal amount of value in terms of what you're going to be doing to help them get to that final stage, right? So I'm going to walk you through step by step what the acronym means, and we'll start with presentation. So presentation is kind of the beginning part. So you're going to start by choosing a resource or writing your own. And there's a lot out there that kind of goes both ways with this. Some people will say you should use authentic resources 100% of the time, nothing but. And when it comes to this PACE model, what you're actually looking for is some sort of article, some sort of video that incorporates the theme that you're working in, but also incorporates the grammar you're working in. And so that sometimes exists, but unfortunately, sometimes it does not. And quite often it does not. I've spent hours going down the rabbit hole looking for that authentic resource that happens to have the grammar point I'm looking for that talks about the theme I'm working with. And when I find that, I tattoo it on my arm. That thing will stay with me for life. I will forever carry this document with me because it's such a great find. But that doesn't always exist. So my rule of thumb is I look for about an hour at most, not all at once. I look for about an hour, and after an hour, I just write my own resource, and I find that that's a-okay. So you can write a story, so you can find some sort of authentic resource with the grammar present, but not super obvious in the sense of not every sentence has the grammar point you're looking for. It has it included naturally. Your goals for this resource is to be really comprehensible to the learner. So that thinking I+1, there's going to be stuff they understand, there's going to be new stuff in there, and they're going to have to work to interpret it. So in terms of setting this up, it's going to be thinking of it in terms of an interpretive activity. So I'm going to think of what I'm going to do prior to working through the story or prior to working through the resource. So I'm going to activate some prior knowledge. Maybe I want to have them look at some photos that'll help them visualize what they're about to read about. Maybe I want to pre-teach some vocabulary that's in there so that the vocabulary isn't impeding their ability to comprehend the text. Maybe I want to ask them some personalized questions to kind of get them thinking about the themes of the story. After I kind of work through the pre-part, I would then want to have them doing stuff with the resource. A really common thing that people fall into is that they will provide a resource or they'll tell a story and the kids sit there. And you don't want them just sitting there. You want them doing something. You want them actively involved with the interpretation of that resource. So thinking about really good things like sequencing the events of what happened, categorizing, was this a good decision? Was this a bad decision? Maybe it's a story about that. Identifying characters, identifying traits, doing something. I've seen some awesome ones where if it's a story, they'll have somebody that's talking, that like tells a story, and the kids hold up pictures that match that part of the story. So they're constantly listening for their part so that they know when to hold up their picture. After you finish that, then you're going to wrap it up. You never want to just stop. You want to do some sort of interaction with it afterwards, using the resource to complete some sort of task. So you want them maybe writing about something, maybe expressing their opinion, maybe saying what would be an alternative ending to this, something so that they have to use what they just read and do more with it. If you're wondering, oh, can I do this in a class? This should probably take a couple of classes. To do a PACE model really, really well, you want to set aside a few classes for this. So this would be multiple lessons depending on how long your blocks are. So doing the pre-story could take anywhere up to 10 to 20 minutes. During the resource could take you the whole class. It depends on how long the resource is, how complex it is, what your tasks are, and how you wrap it up. But making it last a few days is usually valuable because then it tells the kids this is a valuable experience we're going through. So after P, so P stands for presentation, A stands for attention. So here we're going to highlight the grammar point. This should not have been obvious to them. They should not have been able to do this themselves. So what I always say to do is either color code or bold those words you want them to look at. Don't ever just say, have at it, kids, see what you notice about the text. That's going to get you kind of in a messier spot. And so what you want is something so that they are guided to where they need to be looking. And I've fallen for this trap so many times, and I've learned it through many, many lessons that you want to make sure that that's really obvious to them. And you're going to ask them some specific questions to guide their exploration. Asking them questions of, what do you notice when the verb is in this form? What do you notice about this? How do you think this is used, right? Kind of to get them thinking. Other questions could be, what do you notice in common with these words? And this one will take a few minutes. And this will not be a class-long activity. The noticing will take just a few minutes. So P is for presentation, A is for attention. So you read this resource, you drew their attention to that there's a new grammar point in there, and now we're coming up to the C of co-construction. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to let them kind of reflect and hypothesize and create their own understandings based on what you drew their attention to. So if you had a new tense in there, you want them working through that first with themselves, maybe with a partner, and then as a full class to kind of let them kind of get to that stage. This is going to look more like a dialogue between you and the students and less of a monologue. Up to this point, when we taught, it was us up at the front and we gave all of the information. And now it's going to be more of a them doing most of the talking, and you're kind of trying to pry that information and trying to guide their thinking a little bit, manipulate it a little bit. This can be done in the target language if you think about the words you need. You're using things like the alphabet. You're saying things like, is this masculine or feminine? You're saying, is this singular or plural? Is this present, past, or future? And in a lot of languages, those are words that you use frequently, or they're cognates. So these types of things really can be done in the target language, and that kind of keeps that 90% goal from the actual core practices. You want to ask direct questions. So maybe if kids aren't noticing things, you then want to point up to an example and say, well, what do you notice about this one thing that I bolded right here for you? The more direct your questions are, the more direct your answers are going to be, and that's going to help in co-constructing that. So you're going to ask them things like, well, what happens when I change this from the yo form to the LNA form, right? Is there anything you notice when I have an AR verb versus an ER verb? This one's key too. Don't jump to explaining rules. This is not where you jump to doing this, because I've fallen for the trap where the kid says, well, I think that this could be used to describe the future. And I'm like, yes, this is the future tense. Let me tell you everything that you could ever need to know about the future tense. No, let them do so much work. Like, get as much out of them as you possibly can. That's really the goal. And it's so hard to sit back and just let them do that, but it's so meaningful. It's so worth it. And you got to let them be wrong with things. Okay, let them hypothesize with this stuff. Redirect them if that is what ends up happening. Okay. After you feel like you've gotten everything out of them, go to an explicit explanation and fill in those missing gaps. So maybe they missed an irregular verb, maybe they missed a certain pattern, maybe they missed a subject pronoun. Fill in those gaps. And that's that idea from the actual core practices. Fill in what they noticed implicitly, and now give them a little bit of that explicit knowledge so that you're discovering it together. Instead of it all being explicitly told, this is how it is, now it's also implicitly discovered first. And that co-construction will probably take about like 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes most, depending on how you get it done with them. Okay? And you want to spend some really, really quality time and let the silence kind of happen. From there, the extension phase is where we kind of start to feel comfortable. So P is presentation, A is attention, C is co-construction, E is extension. So here's where I'm going to kind of come back to my normal self and feel better. And I'm going to choose activities that enable my learners to use the grammar point in the context of the theme. Not in isolation. I'm going to find ways to bring in more interpretive resources related to that theme. Maybe I have them do a debate or a role play. I have them write blog posts or do quick writes. And then these are several days of built activities to kind of get them using the grammar point in the context of my theme. So this all sounds fine and dandy. Let's see what it looks like in the context of an actual lesson. So this is a lesson that I do in my Spanish 3 class. Their goal is they're an intermediate mid. They're shooting for a strong intermediate mid. And at this point, this is probably about like, I usually do this around February. So we've had a lot of work together. And so what you're gonna see here are a series of tweets. So this is my presentation phase. So I found a bunch of tweets. This is one of those things where I was like, yes, the world unites. And I found all these tweets that talk about health, which is my theme. And they also incorporate the present perfect, which you can see here, like ha cambiado, right? And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give them really, really basic interpretive questions to do as they look through all of these tweets. So I'm asking them very simply, is this a positive or negative tweet? What's the point of this? And I might ask them one specific detail question to keep up with that intermediate mid idea of what do you think that this means, okay? So here they're talking about organ donation. Here we're talking about somebody talking about not watching TV and it being an improvement for their health, right? And so we have some present perfect here. I even got present perfect all the way down here into the like responses, which I was like, oh my God, this is outstanding. Thank you so much, universe. And I keep doing these same questions. Is this positive or negative, right? What do you think this means? Asking interpretive questions. And so I continue this for a while. I think I have about 5 tweets total, and that's like my part of my presentation mode. Okay? So I'm really setting this is setting the scene for them to realize that we're still talking about health in different situations, and they are just interpreting for meaning. From there, I combine it. I do a presentation to go along with it just to really enforce what's going on. So I have no shame with myself whatsoever. And so what I do is I ask them to kind of, this is the pre-stage where they predict what did the doctor say to me in terms of my health, right? So did he gain weight? Did he lose weight? Did he have cardiovascular problems? Like they're a little up and personal, but like we have that kind of relationship, so it's okay. So they kind of go through and they predict like what happened. Spanish teachers, you'll notice that these are all in the past tense. And because I'm introducing the present perfect tense, which is a version of the past, I want them thinking in the past. I'm setting that stage already for them. So from there, I do this presentation, and it's ridiculous, and it's something. And so what they're going to do is they're going to go through and they're going to check off all the things that I say in my presentation, all the things that the doctor told me, and all the things that I have done recently to improve my health. All of what I've talked about so far is presentation. Okay? So they're doing tons and tons of presentation, and all they're doing is focusing on the meaning of it. So then I want to draw their attention to it. So what I did was I bolded those present perfect verbs that are in the tweets and then some of the sentences from my activity. And I had to make sure to bold those. And I could even take it a step further next year and color code. The first part is a, as, or whatever. And the second part with those and the those, like the past participle. I can set all that up. Okay, so that it's really, really clear what I'm drawing their attention to. From there, after they worked with a partner, I asked them to create the rules for the yo form and the LNA forms, and for AR, ER, and IR verbs. Okay, and all of this was done in the target language. I asked them to figure out what would happen if I changed subjects, and they were able to realize, well, usually if this is LNA, I can just add an N, and that usually makes it AO's form, right? When they didn't get things, like for example, they wouldn't have had a nosotros form, I filled in that gap. Okay, I asked them if they saw any verbs that didn't follow that ado or ido pattern, right? So then we were able to figure out some irregular verbs. Most importantly, I asked them, when do we use this tense? And because of the scaffolding that I had done where they saw past tense when we're talking about the doctor, and they were able to put some things together, they saw some recientemente, talking about recently, this what Senor has done, they were able to realize, oh, this is the past tense, but it's not like a regular past tense. And we had this dialogue back and forth where I was able to guide their thinking to realize that this is past, this is recent past, and this is talking about what has happened. From there, I asked them, all right, you have all these theories. I didn't tell you if it's right or not. Let's put this to the test. So tell me what some more things that Senor probably has done for his diet, for his physical health, or for his mental health. And they were able to use the patterns that they discovered to say things like, Senor has probably eliminated his Netflix account, which I didn't do. Senor probably has eaten less ice cream, also didn't do. But so they were able to put these things together and make sentences using this new tense that they discovered, and they kind of had a lot more ownership of this. And then we kept going where we read about other people talking about their problems, and then I had them do some interpretive in terms of figuring out what other people will likely have done. Can you come up with 2 more likely things that they have done since whatever problem that they may have had or whatever doctor's visit they may have had? And then from there, we go into the extension phase, because I never want it to just end here. I want to always be doing something with it afterwards. So then I kind of broke it into 3s. And in my mind, I always like to do things in 3s. So I wanted my first part to be, how has your diet affected your health? So my first extension was an article about the Mediterranean diet, learning about that, adding in the cultural element, and then writing a letter to your friend talking about how your diet has affected your health, and talking about how the Mediterranean diet has affected somebody else's health. This question they love so much. How has Wellesley High School affected your health? So we look at school schedules, like from Spanish 1, but we look at them with a different lens now and about mental health. And then we do a role play to talk about how Wellesley has affected their health. And then we do technology, where they read an article on the pros and cons of technology and health. And they do a debate about, has technology improved or made worse our health? Okay. So what I'm able to do is take that idea within the health realm, right, within that health theme, and we talk about diets, we talk about Wellesley High School, and then we talk about technology. And all of these include my grammar point embedded within each one. So I have some parting tips for you in terms of setting up PACE lessons and trying them out. First thing is, don't be afraid to make mistakes with it. There's gonna be so many mistakes. I keep making mistakes every single time I do it, but I learn so much from it. And I always remember that no matter what, any of these mistakes I make are always providing input to my students no matter what. So even if the co-construction didn't go as the way I planned it to go, they still were able to get input with that grammar point, and they were able to interpret it, and I still was able to do that with them. So no matter what, it's not, I never view it as a fail. I always view it as an opportunity. They learned something. Think of it as another opportunity, like I said, to provide that input to your students. Use yourself as an authentic resource. They find us fascinating, no idea why, but like they find us to be these fascinating creatures. And if you're having a hard time finding an authentic resource, then write a story about yourself. I've done this so many times. I've either made up characters or used my actual friends. They don't know that I've done that. But it's so fascinating because you can kind of create the story behind them, and they kind of get invested in the characters that are part of your life. And they just find everything about you to be weirdly fascinating with that. Really important is that pace does not work for all grammar points. This was something I fell into really early on when I tried out pace, as I tried to do it for, I tried everything out of pace. Nope, pace doesn't work for everything. It has to be something with a discoverable rule, something that learners can look at, figure out the meaning of it, and figure out the usage of it. Okay, because remember, you're focusing on meaning before form. If it's complicated, there might be another method for you to be able to figure these out. So in this short webinar, I was able to talk to you about grammar as a concept, and I was also able to talk about the PACE model. I want to provide you with some more examples. If you go to this tiny URL, it brings you to a document with PACE examples and some ideas called structured input, which I'm happy to explain on my blog, madlanguageteacher.weebly.com. And I'm always willing to talk to people via email. That's my email. Please reach out to me. This is something I keep working on. This is something I keep researching, and I'm really, really excited to be able to share this with you today. So again, I want to thank the National Foreign Language Center, and I want to thank all of you for being part of our 2020 Virtual Summit. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your summer.